Governor Marcus Thompson was not like most politicians. He didn't come from a wealthy family or grow up in a big city with all the privileges that others might have had. Instead, he was born into poverty in a small southern town, where life was tough and opportunities were scarce. His childhood home was modest, a tiny house with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it was filled with love. His mother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, and his father, though absent for much of his early years, taught him the value of hard work whenever he was around. From an early age, Marcus learned how to fight for what he wanted. School wasn't easy for him. Some teachers dismissed him because of where he came from, while classmates teased him for wearing hand-me-down clothes. But Marcus had something they couldn't take away: determination. He spent hours studying by candlelight when the electricity bill went unpaid, dreaming of a better future. He knew education was his ticket out of the struggles of his hometown, so he threw himself into his studies with everything he had. As Marcus grew older, his passion for fairness and justice began to shine through. In high school, he joined debate clubs where he spoke passionately about issues affecting his community, things like poor schools, lack of jobs, and unfair treatment by those in power. People noticed his energy and conviction, even if they didn't always agree with him. Some called him stubborn, but Marcus saw it as standing firm on what he believed in. After graduating at the top of his class, Marcus earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. For the first time in his life, he left his hometown and stepped into a world far different from what he'd known. College was eye-opening. It introduced him to people from all walks of life, many of whom had never faced the challenges he endured growing up. At first, he felt out of place, unsure if he truly belonged. But instead of letting self-doubt hold him back, Marcus used it as fuel to push harder. He majored in political science, determined to understand how systems worked and how they could be improved. During his college years, Marcus became deeply involved in activism. He organized protests against policies that hurt marginalized communities and volunteered at local shelters to help families struggling to get by. These experiences shaped his worldview and solidified his belief that real change required action, not just words. By the time he graduated, Marcus knew exactly what he wanted to do: dedicate his life to public service. His journey into politics wasn't smooth. Running for office meant facing rejection, skepticism, and even hostility. Many doubted whether someone from his background could succeed in such a cutthroat field. Critics whispered that he was too inexperienced, too idealistic, or simply not ready for the responsibilities of leadership. But Marcus refused to let their doubts define him. With the support of mentors, friends, and grassroots organizers, he ran for local office and won, a victory that shocked even his harshest critics. Over the next decade, Marcus climbed the ranks of politics, earning a reputation as a bold and compassionate leader. He championed causes close to his heart, including criminal justice reform, affordable housing, and equal access to education. His progressive policies often put him at odds with powerful figures who preferred the status quo. Yet, no matter how much resistance he faced, Marcus stayed true to his principles. He believed that being a leader meant listening to the voices of those who were often ignored. By the time he was elected governor, Marcus had become a symbol of hope for many. He was one of the youngest governors in the state's history, and his story resonated with people from all backgrounds. But success hadn't erased the scars of his past. Growing up poor and black in a society plagued by inequality had left its mark. Marcus understood firsthand the pain of discrimination and the frustration of feeling powerless. That's why he made it his mission to create a government that worked for everyone, not just the privileged few. Despite his accomplishments, Marcus remained humble. He often reminded himself of where he came from, keeping photos of his childhood home on his desk as a reminder of his roots. And though he now lived in a grand mansion and attended elegant events, he never forgot the struggles of ordinary people. He visited neighborhoods like the one he grew up in, sitting down with residents to hear their stories and learn about their needs. This connection to the everyday person set him apart from other politicians, earning him both admiration and enemies. Not Everyone appreciated Marcus's approach. Some viewed him as a threat to the old ways of doing things, accusing him of rocking the boat or trying to move too fast. Others resented him simply because of who he was, a black man in a position of power. While Marcus tried to focus on his work, he couldn't ignore the whispers and side glances, the subtle reminders that not everyone welcomed his presence. Still, he pressed on, knowing that progress rarely came without resistance. Little did Marcus know, however, that his greatest test was yet to come. One day, during what should have been a routine visit to a struggling neighborhood, he would find himself face to face with the ugliest side of humanity. But this moment wouldn't break him. It would reveal his strength in ways no one could have predicted. On a crisp autumn morning, Governor Marcus Thompson climbed into his car ready to begin another day of work. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of fallen leaves. His schedule for the day included a visit to a community center, located in one of the state's most underserved neighborhoods. This wasn't just any ordinary stop, it was personal. Marcus had heard from residents about the challenges they faced daily: crumbling infrastructure, underfunded schools, and limited access to basic resources like healthcare and grocery stores. He wanted to see these issues firsthand and listen to the people who lived there. The drive took him through parts of the city that many politicians avoided. Streets lined with boarded-up buildings gave way to small parks where children played basketball on cracked courts. Despite the visible signs of neglect, there was also a sense of resilience in the air. People greeted each other warmly, sharing stories and laughter as they went about their day. It reminded Marcus of his own childhood, the same struggles, but also the same strength and determination to keep moving forward. When he arrived at the community center, a modest brick building surrounded by overgrown grass, Marcus stepped out of his car. His security detail followed closely behind, scanning the area for anything unusual. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with activity. Volunteers were setting up tables for an upcoming food drive, while parents chatted near the entrance, keeping an eye on their kids playing nearby. As soon as Marcus walked in, whispers spread through the room. Residents recognized him immediately, some clapping softly, others nodding in respect. They were surprised and pleased to see their governor here among them. Marcus wasted no time getting to work. He shook hands, introduced himself, and asked questions. "What do you need most?" he asked a young mother holding her toddler. She hesitated before answering, clearly unused to being listened to by someone in power. "Better schools," she said finally, "and safer streets." Another man chimed in, talking about the lack of jobs in the area. A teenager spoke up about wanting more after-school programs to keep kids off the streets. Each person had a story to tell, and Marcus listened intently, jotting down notes and promising to take action. For nearly an hour, everything seemed to be going smoothly. The mood inside the community center was hopeful, even optimistic. But outside, trouble was brewing. Two plainclothes police officers patrolling the neighborhood spotted the governor's official car parked along the curb. At first glance, it didn't seem unusual. Politicians often visited various parts of the city. But something about the scene made them suspicious. Why would a high-ranking official like the governor be in this part of town? Curiosity turned to skepticism as the officers approached the vehicle. One of them peered inside, noting the driver sitting quietly behind the wheel. Then they turned their attention to the community center itself. Through the windows, they could see Marcus standing near a group of residents, deep in conversation. Something about the image didn't sit right with them. To them, it looked odd, a governor mingling with people in a low-income neighborhood. Their minds jumped to conclusions fueled by bias and prejudice. Without bothering to investigate further, the officers stormed into the building. The sudden intrusion startled everyone. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as all eyes turned toward the two men in suits, their badges clipped to their belts. The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus noticed the shift immediately. He paused, mid-sentence, looking up to see what had caused the disruption. "Excuse me," one of the officers barked, his tone sharp and accusatory. "Who are you and why are you here?" Marcus straightened up, taken aback by the rudeness. Still, he remained calm. I'm Governor Marcus Thompson, he replied evenly, extending a hand. I'm visiting the community center today to speak with residents about their concerns. The officers exchanged glances, disbelief written across their faces. Governor? One of them repeated, scoffing. You don't look like a governor. The comment hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus felt the weight of it but chose not to react. Instead, he gestured toward his security team who stood nearby. My team can verify my identity if needed, he said, maintaining his composure. But the officers weren't interested in verification. Their skepticism morphed into hostility. We'll decide whether you're telling the truth, one of them snapped. Without warning, they demanded to see identification. Marcus reached into his pocket to retrieve his ID, but the officers didn't wait. They began questioning him aggressively, their voices rising with each passing second. Residents watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. Some recognized the governor and knew this was wrong, but fear kept them quiet. Others whispered among themselves, wondering how this situation had escalated so quickly. Meanwhile, Marcus tried to de-escalate the situation, speaking calmly and rationally. But the officers weren't listening. Their minds were closed, their judgment clouded by preconceived notions about who belonged where. As the confrontation continued, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. What had started as a peaceful visit to connect with constituents was rapidly spiraling into something far more sinister. And though Marcus couldn't have known it yet, this moment would test him in ways he never imagined. The tension inside the community center was thick enough to cut with a knife. Residents exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do or say. The two officers, now standing just a few feet away from Governor Marcus Thompson, radiated hostility. Their body language screamed distrust. Arms crossed, shoulders squared, and eyes narrowed as if they were sizing him up for something he hadn't done. Despite their skepticism, Marcus remained composed, his voice steady as he tried to explain himself. I've already told you I'm Governor Marcus Thompson, he said firmly but calmly, holding out his identification card. You can verify this with my security detail or call the State House directly. But the officers weren't interested in reason. One of them snatched the ID from Marcus's hand, barely glancing at it before tossing it aside. Anyone can fake an ID, he sneered. His partner chimed in, his tone dripping with disdain. Why would someone like you be here? This isn't your neighborhood. The words hit hard, though Marcus didn't let it show on his face. He understood exactly what the officer meant by someone like you. It wasn't just about where he came from. It was about the color of his skin. These men had decided within seconds that Marcus didn't belong, not because of any evidence, but because of their own biases. They assumed he was lying, not because he gave them a reason to doubt him, but because they couldn't or wouldn't believe that a black man could hold such a powerful position. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help anyone, least of all the people watching silently around him. Many of them looked frightened, others angry, but none dared to intervene. Some whispered urgently under their breath, trying to convince each other to step forward. An elderly woman stepped closer, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her cane. "This is our governor," she exclaimed loudly, pointing at Marcus. "I've seen him on TV. You're making a mistake." Her voice echoed through the room, breaking the tense silence for a brief moment. But the officers ignored her completely, dismissing her words as irrelevant. Instead, they turned their attention back to Marcus, their expressions growing darker. "Don't try to play games with us," one of them growled. "If you're really who you say you are, then prove it." At this point, Marcus's security team began to intervene. Two members stepped forward, their presence authoritative, yet non-threatening. "Officers," one of them said firmly, "this is Governor Marcus Thompson. Please treat him with respect." But the officers brushed them off too, refusing to acknowledge their authority. "Stay out of this," one snapped. "We're handling it." Then, without warning, they moved toward Marcus, grabbing his arms roughly. Before anyone could react, they slapped handcuffs on him, locking them tightly around his wrists. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. People froze in shock, unable to believe what they were seeing. Here was their governor, elected to serve the entire state, being treated like a criminal right in front of them. Children clung to their parents, wide-eyed and confused. Adults clenched their fists, torn between fear and outrage. Even the volunteers setting up for the food drive stopped what they were doing, staring in disbelief. For Marcus, the humiliation was almost unbearable. Standing there in handcuffs, surrounded by people who knew him and trusted him, felt like a punch to the gut. Yet, he refused to let the officers see how deeply their actions stung. He stood tall, his jaw set, his eyes locked straight ahead. Inside, however, his mind raced. How could this happen? How could two officers blatantly disregard protocol and basic human decency simply because of who he was? The insults kept coming, relentless and cruel. "Thought you could fool us, huh?" one officer taunted, leaning in close so only Marcus could hear. "Acting all high and mighty, walking into places you don't belong. Bet you thought you were special, didn't you?" Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to dignify their cruelty with a reply. Instead, he focused on the faces around him. The residents who looked on in horror, the children whose innocence was being shattered, and the elderly woman who had spoken up for him moments earlier. He wanted to tell them that everything would be okay, that justice would prevail, but he knew better than to make promises he couldn't guarantee. As the officers continued their verbal assault, Marcus quietly began taking mental notes. He memorized every word they said, every gesture they made, and most importantly, their badge numbers. When one of them leaned over to adjust his radio, Marcus spoke clearly and deliberately, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Your badge number is 4729, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Then, turning slightly, he added, "And yours is 5163. The effect was immediate. The officers faltered, their bravado wavering for just a split second. They hadn't expected him to fight back, not like this. By speaking their badge numbers aloud, Marcus ensured that witnesses would remember them. He knew these details could be crucial later when accountability came into play. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the room shifted again. Anger began to replace fear. A young man near the door muttered, "They can't treat him like this. He's the governor." Another person nodded fiercely, adding, "Someone needs to record this." Within moments, several phones were out, capturing the scene on video. Residents whispered encouragement to each other, urging one another to stay strong. Despite the mounting tension, Marcus remained eerily calm. He knew this moment wasn't just about him, it was about sending a message. If he lost control, if he let anger take over, he'd give the officers exactly what they wanted, an excuse to justify their behavior. So instead, he stood silent and stoic, letting their actions speak for themselves. Every insult, every derogatory remark, every unnecessary shove, they were painting a picture of prejudice and abuse of power, one that would soon be impossible to ignore. Outside, the sound of sirens grew louder. Word of the incident had spread quickly, thanks to the videos being shared online and frantic calls to local news outlets. Reporters began arriving on the scene, cameras rolling as they captured footage of the governor in handcuffs. The officers, realizing they were losing control of the situation, started to panic. For the first time since they walked into the community center, doubt crept into their expressions. But it was too late. The damage had been done. What should have been a routine visit to connect with constituents had turned into a public spectacle, exposing the ugly truth about systemic racism and unchecked authority. And while Marcus still didn't know how this ordeal would end, one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let it break him. As the chaos unfolded inside the community center, Governor Marcus Thompson's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, frustration, and humiliation swirled within him. But above all, there was clarity, a deep understanding that this moment was bigger than him. He knew he had to stay composed no matter how much his instincts screamed for him to fight back or lash out. This wasn't just about him being handcuffed in front of innocent people. It was about exposing the toxic systems and attitudes that allowed such injustice to happen in the first place? The two officers continued their verbal barrage, their words sharp and cutting. You think you're better than us? One sneered, leaning closer so only Marcus could hear. Walking around like you own the place. Bet you think you're untouchable. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he locked eyes with the officer, his gaze steady and unyielding. I'm not here to prove anything to you, he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. But I will remind you that your actions today are being witnessed by everyone in this room, and beyond. It was a calculated move, meant to plant a seed of doubt in the officers' minds. They might have thought they were in control, but Marcus knew otherwise. With every second that passed, more phones were recording, more videos were being uploaded, and more people were watching. The incident was no longer confined to the four walls of the community center. It was spilling into the public eye where accountability couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, the residents who had gathered at the center began to find their voices again. At first, fear had kept them silent, but now anger and a sense of solidarity was taking over. An older man stepped forward, his arms crossed defiantly. "Let him go," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "He hasn't done anything wrong." Others quickly joined in, their shouts growing louder and more unified. "This is our governor," a woman cried, pointing at Marcus. "How dare you treat him like this?" Even the children, sensing the shift in energy, began chanting softly, "Let him go, let him go." The officers looked around nervously, realizing they were losing control of the situation. Their bravado faltered as they realized the weight of what they'd done. For a fleeting moment, they glanced at each other, unsure of what to do next. But instead of backing down, they doubled down on their aggression, barking orders at the crowd to step back and threatening to arrest anyone who got too close. Marcus, still standing tall despite the handcuffs digging into his wrists, used this moment to address the room. "I want to thank all of you for standing with me," he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength that silenced the murmurs. "What's happening here today isn't right, and we won't let it stand. Together, we can make sure this kind of behavior doesn't happen again, not to me and not to anyone else." His words ignited something in the crowd. People nodded vigorously, some wiping away tears, others clenching their fists in determination. It was as if Marcus had given them permission to channel their outrage into action. One young woman pulled out her phone and started live streaming the scene, narrating everything that was happening while urging viewers to share the video. Within minutes, hashtags like Trigger Justice for Marcus and Congress Stand with Governor Thompson began trending online. Outside, the commotion attracted even more attention. News vans rolled up to the curb, their satellite dishes pointing skyward as reporters scrambled to get the story. Local activists arrived, holding signs that read, "Respect our leaders and end racial bias now." Neighbors poured out of nearby homes, drawn by the noise and eager to see what was going on. The once quiet street transformed into a bustling scene of protest and solidarity. Back inside, Marcus's security team worked tirelessly to de-escalate the situation. They contacted headquarters, demanding immediate intervention. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to document everything, repeating the officers' badge numbers aloud whenever possible. "Remember these numbers," he told the crowd, 4729 and 5163. Accountability starts with knowing who's responsible. The repetition served another purpose. It rattled the officers. Each time Marcus spoke their badge numbers, they shifted uncomfortably, their confidence crumbling further. They hadn't anticipated facing such resistance or such organization from the very people they sought to intimidate. What had started as an attempt to assert dominance had spiraled into a confrontation they couldn't win. Finally, after what felt like hours, reinforcements arrived. Uniformed officers entered the community center, followed by a high-ranking official who immediately recognized Marcus. "Governor Thompson," the official said, rushing over. "What's going on here?" Before Marcus could respond, the plainclothes officers tried to explain themselves, stammering excuses about mistaken identity and suspicious activity. But their lies fell flat in the face of overwhelming evidence. Dozens of witnesses had recorded the entire incident, capturing every insult and act of aggression. The sheer volume of footage made it impossible for the officers to deny what they'd done. With a curt nod, the senior officer ordered the handcuffs removed from Marcus's wrists. As soon as he was free, Marcus rubbed his sore wrists, but wasted no time dwelling on his discomfort. Instead, he turned to the crowd, raising his hands to quiet them. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Your courage and support mean everything to me. Today, we've shown that when we stand together, we can shine a light on injustice and demand change." The applause that followed was thunderous, reverberating through the small community center. People cheered, hugged each other, and chanted Marcus's name. For many, this was more than just a victory for their governor. It was a victory for their community, a reminder that their voices mattered. As Marcus prepared to leave, he paused near the doorway, looking back at the residents who had stood by him. "This isn't over," he promised. "We'll use this moment to push for real change, to ensure that no one else has to endure what happened here today. Stay strong and keep fighting." With that, Marcus stepped outside, greeted by flashes of cameras and cheers from the growing crowd. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust toward him, but Marcus held up a hand, signaling that he would speak later. For now, he simply took a deep breath, feeling the cool autumn air fill his lungs. Though the ordeal had been painful, it had also reinforced his resolve. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't alone. Together they would turn this moment of injustice into a catalyst for progress. The moment Governor Marcus Thompson stepped outside the community center, he was met with a sea of faces, some angry, some curious, and many supportive. News crews jostled for position, their cameras flashing like strobe lights as they tried to capture his every move. Reporters shouted questions from all directions. "Governor Thompson, what happened inside? Did the officers target you because of your race? Will you press charges?" For a brief second, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the chaos, but then he remembered something his mother used to tell him when he was a child. "When life throws storms at you, stand tall and let them pass." He took another deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and raised a hand to signal for silence. Slowly, the noise began to die down, though it never fully disappeared. People leaned in closer, eager to hear what he had to say. "I want to start by thanking each and every one of you," Marcus began, his voice steady but warm. "Thank you for standing with me today, for showing up, speaking out, and refusing to stay silent. Your courage is what will drive real change." His words earned immediate applause, but Marcus quickly held up his hand again to continue. "What happened here today wasn't just about me. It was about exposing the deep-rooted issues that still plague our society. Issues like systemic racism, abuse of power, and inequality. These problems didn't start today, and they won't end tomorrow. But together, we can take steps to address them." As he spoke, Marcus's tone shifted from gratitude to determination. His eyes scanned the crowd, locking onto individuals who nodded along or wiped away tears. He knew this was a pivotal moment, not just for himself, but for everyone, watching, whether in person or through their screens. This wasn't just an opportunity to condemn injustice. It was a chance to inspire action. "Let me be clear," he continued, his voice rising slightly to emphasize his point. "The actions of those two officers were unacceptable. They violated not only my rights but also the trust placed in law enforcement to protect and serve all members of our community. And while I hold them accountable for their behavior, I also recognize that they are part of a larger system, one that needs reform." The crowd erupted into cheers, some chanting phrases like, "Reform now," and "No more racism." Marcus waited patiently for the noise to settle before continuing. "We need accountability, yes, but we also need solutions. That's why I'm calling for sweeping reforms within our police departments, starting with mandatory training on racial sensitivity and implicit bias. Officers must understand the impact of their words and actions, especially when interacting with communities of color." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then with a small smile, he added, And let's not forget the importance of transparency. Body cameras should become standard practice, not optional. We need to ensure that incidents like this are documented and addressed swiftly and fairly. By now, the energy in the crowd was electric. People clapped, cheered, and even cried openly, moved by Marcus's vision for a better future. A young woman holding a sign that read, "Justice starts here," stepped forward and handed him a bouquet of flowers she'd brought along. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "You give us hope." Marcus accepted the flowers with a nod of appreciation, then turned back to the crowd. "Hope is powerful," he said, raising the bouquet slightly as if to symbolize its significance. "But hope alone isn't enough. We need action. So today, I'm announcing the creation of a statewide task force dedicated to addressing racial bias in law enforcement. This task force will include representatives from diverse backgrounds, community leaders, activists, educators, and even officers willing to advocate for change." The announcement drew loud cheers, with many people shouting their approval. Marcus went on to explain that the task force would focus on 3 key areas: education, accountability, and community engagement. Education means teaching officers how to interact respectfully with all citizens, regardless of race or background. Accountability means holding bad actors responsible for their actions, without exception. And community engagement means building bridges between law enforcement and the people they serve. He paused again, sensing the weight of his words. The crowd hung on every syllable, their eyes fixed on him as if he were the only person in the world. "This isn't going to be easy," Marcus admitted. "Change rarely is. There will be resistance. From those who fear losing power, from those who cling to outdated beliefs, and from those who simply don't see the problem. But I believe in the goodness of most people. I believe that when we come together, we can overcome anything." With that, Marcus wrapped up his speech by urging everyone to stay involved. "Don't stop speaking out," he said passionately. "Share your stories, demand answers, and hold your leaders accountable, including me. Real progress happens when ordinary people refuse to accept the status quo." As he finished, the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Some chanted his name, others waved signs, and a few even broke into spontaneous songs of unity. Reporters scrambled to get closer, firing off rapid-fire questions about the task force, potential legislation, and next steps. Marcus answered a few briefly, promising to provide more details in the coming days, but he made it clear that his priority right now was listening. To the residents, to the activists, and to anyone else impacted by what had happened. Later, that evening, after returning to his office, Marcus sat quietly at his desk, replaying the events of the day in his mind. Despite the whirlwind of emotions, he felt a strange sense of peace. The incident had been humiliating and painful, but it had also reminded him why he chose this path in the first place. Every struggle, every setback, and every moment of injustice only strengthened his resolve to fight harder for the people who needed him most. As he reviewed the notes from his security team and watched snippets of the viral videos online, Marcus couldn't help but notice something remarkable: the overwhelming support pouring in from across the state and even the country. Social media platforms were flooded with messages of solidarity, hashtags spreading like wildfire, and petitions demanding justice for what had happened. Celebrities, politicians, and everyday citizens alike were amplifying the story, ensuring it stayed in the spotlight. One particular comment caught Marcus's eye. It was from a teenager who wrote, "I didn't know governors could look like me until I saw you today. Thank you for showing me that leadership has no color." Reading those words brought tears to his eyes. In that moment, Marcus realized that his role extended far beyond policymaking. He was a symbol, a living reminder that representation matters, that dreams are achievable no matter where you start, and that resilience can turn adversity into opportunity. But Marcus also knew that symbols weren't enough. Words and promises had to translate into tangible results. As he drafted plans for the task force and brainstormed ideas for new legislation, he kept thinking about the 2 officers who had handcuffed him earlier that day. What would happen to them? Would they face consequences for their actions? More importantly, could they learn from this experience? Before heading home, Marcus scribbled a note to himself on a post-it. Forgiveness is powerful, but accountability is necessary. He stuck it to the corner of his desk, a subtle reminder that justice and compassion could coexist, if handled carefully. Whatever happened next, Marcus vowed to approach it with both firmness and fairness. After all, true leadership wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about transforming hearts and minds.